Well, I want to bring in Joshua Rowe now from the Australian Christian Lobby. He's their New South Wales director, and he's been walking the halls of Parliament trying to help MPs understand the threat to religious freedom from this bill. Josh, thanks for joining us. We've seen headlines in recent days from the Australian Associated Press Newswire saying people could go to jail simply for praying under this legislation. Tell us what that's all about.
Well, what that's about is that some prayers can actually still be banned under this legislation. I mean, the fundamental premise of the bill is that conversion practices should be banned because they're based on a misconception that a certain group of people are broken, and they refer to the LGBTQ plus community. But what's important to recognize is that Christians believe fundamentally in the gospel, and that says that we are all indeed broken and in need of repentance. And for Christians, that doesn't matter whether it's an unfaithful husband or a promiscuous youth or someone living within a homosexual relationship. We believe that that falls outside God's intention for right sexual relationship. And pastors will pray, they will teach, and they will counsel people in accordance with that message consistently. However, that is equated to a conversion practice. And if it's deemed by the courts that that causes significant mental harm to the individual, even if they're coming consenting, that pastor can face up to 5 years imprisonment.
Yeah, that's just extraordinary. And of course, when Christians, as you and I are, when we talk about brokenness, that applies to any area of sin. It seems like some of our political opponents in the LGBTIQA plus political movement, they're hung up on the sexual aspects of Christian and even Muslim morality, but this idea of brokenness applies right across the board. So it really is quite extraordinary. Let's just unpack this a bit, because it really is an attack on theology and the Bible and the gospel itself. Now, different from Victoria and Queensland, the criminal offence under this New South Wales bill would require proof of so-called harm caused to a victim, according to the New South Wales Attorney General, Michael Daly. Now, Daly's reported as saying, and I quote, "It would remain legal for a religious leader to preach to a group that, in our faith, being a homosexual is wrong and it's a sin and you can go to hell. That's not a conversion practice," end quote, Michael Daly said. Now, Josh, just before I bring you into that, I just want to be really clear there. That quote that Daly has used, I've been a Christian all my life. I've never heard a church preach that to a same-sex attracted person. I don't think they would want to. I don't think that's a freedom that's sought. That is a statement that's true of all sin, not just singling out one particular sin. But just to Daly's point then, does that provide, some comfort to church leaders, to Christian leaders, that they can be faithful to the gospel when it comes to all areas of sin, not just homosexuality?
Well, as you say, Lyle, it's only really protecting kind of these direct statements about sexuality directed at people living in a homosexual relationship. And as you said, as Christians, that's not really what we're about. And so when it comes to actually holistically caring for someone and pastoring them through their brokenness and their sinfulness, it's not just targeted at someone's sexuality. And in those conversations, pastors will inevitably walk through previous trauma, brokenness, and sin in someone's life and continue to confront that. And that can actually be equated to a suppression practice. So this protection, it provides some form of protection for indirect statements of belief. But when we're actually talking about everyday pastoral care and prayer, there's not much protection there, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think people don't realise that this sort of counselling, this sort of prayer is initiated by the person who's gone to their church leader or their pastor or someone they trust seeking help and counselling. Josh, Daly also said that, quote, sitting down with someone and directing that practice to them with the intention of praying the gay away, that is. Now, he's saying that when that's happening, that could be a breach of the law. Now, I don't know anyone, I've never heard this term, pray the gay away. That's something which you see activists bandy about in the media all the time. Again, I think it's part of their attempt to defame Christianity and other faiths. But what's happening when the government, is putting through a law that's trying to regulate who can ask for prayer or who can't ask for prayer?
Well, I think it's an authoritarian impingement on the government of religious freedom. That's as simple as it is. And it's very Orwellian in that sense. It's a controlling of what someone can say, what they can pray, what they can think. And that's not the kind of society we want to live in. We're a democratic society here in Australia. We've always upheld and valued freedom of association, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, and that allows for appropriate public discourse and conversations about different opinions, different faiths. And so when you start seeing the government overstep in this way, it actually provokes a lot of fear in people because they no longer feel they can express what they believe, or they no longer feel that they can have robust conversation and dialogue around these issues out of fear that they'll be caught under certain legislation. And as we said before, they can find themselves a maximum of 5 years imprisonment, or under the civil scheme, being fined $100,000. So, yeah, what we're seeing here is just a real overstep from the government in that space.
It sure is. I mean, when you can get fined or put in jail because you respond to a request from someone who wants you to pray with them, that's just unbelievable. If this doesn't wake us up to the need to get involved in politics, I don't think anything will, Josh. Josh, the bill's also got implications for Christian schools, churches and charities. What are the likely impacts on those sort of organisations?
Well, I can see two. Firstly, being bogged down in litigation. So there's a clause within the legislation that says an individual, a family member, or even an associated body can bring a civil complaint against an organization. And so what you could end up seeing is activist bodies bringing against churches civil complaints related to conversion, and they're going to get bogged down in litigation and legal costs, which is never good for religious educational institutions or general institutions who are often tight on funds already. The other thing I can see, which I referred to before, is people within those organizations becoming fearful about expressing their belief and their faith because they can't get the guarantee that for doing so, they're not going to end up in prison or with penalties and fines. And so you see people stepping back and not sharing their biblical perspective on sex and sexual relationship out of fear.
Yeah, that's a terrible thing. And of course, Christian schools and the parents who send their children to those schools have the right to expect that their children are raised in their values, as much as that might be unpalatable to a certain group of society who wants everyone to conform to their values. Josh, as we're recording this, this bill is before the Parliament in New South Wales now. As we said earlier, it's similar to so-called conversion therapy bills which have been passed in Queensland, the ACT and Victoria. What's your sense about whether it will get through? And what are the parliamentarians telling you as you're lobbying them up there in the Parliament, as you're having meetings with them? I know you can't give away confidences, but what's the sense, what's the justification that they're giving you for wanting to pass this legislation?
Well, my read on where the bill is up to is that it will be passed through the Legislative Assembly today. Labor and the Greens with Alex Greenwich have the numbers to move it through quite quickly. And unfortunately, it looks like Labor want to ram it through the Legislative Council by tomorrow as well. Now, my read generally in Parliament from conversations is that a lot of MPs are very concerned about the addition of gender identity. Now, this particular bill does in fact protect the pathway towards transitionary therapy. And we know from around the world that that is a disputed form of care. So there is general concern about that. However, the justification for this legislation is often related to cruel, harmful physical practices like electroshock therapy, often referred to, but it's actually, that's used to masquerade an agenda that's often going on behind it. And a lot of politicians aren't even aware of that agenda and that anti-Christian sentiment, which we've discussed today. And so that's what I continue to highlight as I'm lobbying and draw their attention to.
Yeah, well, good on you, Josh. It's so good to know that you and the ACL team right around the country are doing this work, because this is getting very little coverage in the media. And just on the timing thing too, for our viewers, we're recording this on Wednesday, so by Thursday night, Friday, when people are watching this, this bill may well have passed. So I encourage people to look that up. You can certainly follow my X feed, or I'm sure the ACL's social medias as well, to get an update, because I don't think you're going to be reading too much about the truth of this in the mainstream media, which is a real shame. Josh Rowe from the Australian Christian Lobby, really appreciate your time today.
It's been a pleasure, Lyle. Thank you.